The plains of Uthal formed a wide open space of rolling grassland. The grass was rich and green. There were few trees, although occasional knolls and low hills served to break the monotony. Some distance behind the position occupied by the Ireland army, the plains began to rise gradually to a low ridgeline. Close to the ferns where the wargles were forming up, a creek wound its way. Normally a mere thicket, it had been swallowed by this recent spring rains, so that the ground ahead of the wargles was soft and boggy, precluding any possible attack by the Ireland's heavy cavalry. Baron Fergus of cavalry shaded his eyes against the bright noon sun and peered across the plains to the entrance to the 3 Steps Pass. There were a lot of them, he said mildly, and more coming, Harold of Redmond replied, easing his broadsword a little in its scabbard. The 2 barons were slowly walking their battle horses across the front of Duncan's drawn-up army. It was good for morale, Harold believed, for the men to see their leaders relaxed and engaging in casual conversation as they watched their enemies emerging from the narrow mountains pass and fanning out onto the plains. Dimly they could hear the ominous rhythm chants of the wargles as they jogged into position. "Damn noise is quite unnerving," Fergus muttered, and Harold nodded agreement. Seemingly casual, he cast his glance over the men behind them. The army was in position, but Battlemaster David had told them to remain at rest. Consequently, the cavalry were dismounted, and the infantry and archers were sitting on the grassy slope. No sense in wearing them out, standing at attention in the sun, David had said, and the others had agreed. By the same token, he had set the various kitchen masters the task of keeping the men supplied with cool drinks and fruit. The white-clad servers moved among the army now, carrying baskets and water skins. Harold glanced down and smiled at the portly form of Master Chubb, his chef from Redmond Castle, supervising a group of helpers, apprentices, as they handed out apples and peaches to the men. As ever, his ladle rose and fell with alarming frequency on the heads of any apprentice he deemed to be moving too slowly. Oh my gosh, what is with this? There you go. Give that kitchen master of yours a mace, and he could rout Morgarth's army single-handed, commented Fergus, and Harold smiled thoughtfully. The men around Chubb and his apprentice, distracted by the fat cook's antics, were taking no notice of the chanting from across the plains. In other areas he could see signs of restlessness and evidence that the men were becoming instinctively ill at ease. Looking around, Harold's eyes fell on an infantry captain seated with his company. Their minimal armor, plaid cloaks, and 2-handed bowspears marked them as belonging to one of the northern thieves. He beckoned the man over and leaned down from the saddle as he saluted. "Good morning, Captain," he said easily. "Morning, my lord," replied the officer, his heavy northern accent making the words almost unrecognizable. "Tell me, Captain, do you have pipers among young men?" the Baron asked, smiling. The officer answered immediately in a very serious manner. "Aye, sir, the MacDonald and the MacFawn are with us, and always so when we get to war. Then perhaps you might prevail upon them to give us a reel or two," the Baron suggested. "It might be an altogether more pleasant sound than the tuneless grunting from over yonder." He inclined his head towards the Wargle's forces, and now a slow smile spread over the captain's face. He nodded readily. "Aye, sir, I'll see to it. There's nothing like a skirl or two on the pipes to get a man's blood prancing." Saluting hurriedly, he turned away towards his men, shouting as he ran, "MacDuke, Macduff, gather your wind and set to the pipes, men. Let's hear the the feather-crested Benot from Yi. As the two barons rode on, they heard behind them the preliminary moaning of badgering coming to full volume. Fergus winced and Errol grinned at him. "Nothing like the scale of the pipes to get the blood prancing," he quoted. "In my case, it gets the teeth grinding," replied his companion, surreptitiously nudging his horse with his heel to move them a little further away from the wild sound of the pipes. But when he looked at the men behind them, he had to agree that Errol's idea had worked. The pipes were successfully drowning out the dull chanting, and as the two pipes marched and marched in front of the army, they held the attention of all the men in the immediate vicinity. "Good idea," he said to Errol, then added, I can't help wondering if that's an equally good one." He gestured across the plain to where the Wargles were emerging from the pass and taking up their positions. "All my instincts say we should be hitting them before they have a chance to form up." Errol shrugged. This point had been hotly debated by the War Council for the past few days. "If we hit him as they come out, we simply contain them," he said. "If we went to destroy Morgoth's power once and for all, we have to let him commit his forces in the open, and hope that Holt has been successful in stopping Hoth's army," Fergus said. "I'm getting a nasty crick in my neck from looking over my shoulder to make sure there's no one behind us." "Holt has never let us down before," Errol said mildly. Fergus nodded unhappily. "I know that. He's a remarkable man, but there are so many things that could have gone wrong. He could have missed Hoth's army altogether. He may still be fighting his way through the thorn trees. Or worse yet, Hoth may have defeated his archers and cavalry. There's nothing we can do about it but wait," Errol pointed out, "and keep an eye to the northwest, hoping we don't see battle axes and horned helmets coming over these hills. There's a comforting thought, said Errol, trying to make light of the moment, yet he couldn't resist the temptation to turn in his saddle and peer anxiously towards the hill in its north. Eric had waited till the last few hundred Wargles were moving down 3 steps past to the plains, then forced a small group into the middle of the jogging creatures. There were a few snarls and scowls as the Scandinavians shoved their way into the living stream that was flowing through the narrow, twisting confines of the pass, but the heavily armed sea raiders snarled back and handled their double-sided battle axes with such easy familiarity that the angry Wargles soon backed off and left them alone. Evelyn and Will were in the center of the group, surrounded by the burly Scandinavians. Will's easily recognizable ranger cloak had been hidden away in one of the packs, and both he and Evelyn were sheepskin half-capes that were too large for them. Evelyn's short hair was covered by a woolen cap. So far, none of the Wargles had taken any notice of them, assuming them to be servants or slaves to the small band of sea raiders. "Just keep your mouths shut and your eyes down," Eric had told them as they shoved their way into the crowd of jogging Wargles. The narrow confines of the past echoed to the tuneless chanting that the Wargles used as a cadence. The sound ebbed and flowed about them as they half ran with the stream. Eric's plan was to move eastward as soon as they had cleared the pass, ostensibly with the purpose of taking up a position on the right flank of the Wargles' army. As soon as an opportunity presented itself, the Scandinavians would break off and escape into the swampy wilderness of the Fenlands, traveling through the bogs and grassy islands to the beaches where Horse Fleet lay at anchor. They shuffled along, twisting and turning with their convulsions of the pass. The narrow trail led down through through the sheer mountains for at least 5 kilometers, and Will could understand why it had always been a barrier to both sides. Morgoth's men couldn't move out in any large numbers unless Duncan held back and allowed them to. Similarly, the king's army couldn't penetrate the pass to attack Morgoth on the plateau. Black walls of sheer, glistening wet rock towered above them on either side. The pass was sunlight for less than an hour each day, right on high moon. At any other time, it was cold and damp and shrouded in shadow, all of which served to help conceal the presence of the 2 younger members of the party from prying eyes. Will felt the ground beneath his feet beginning to level out and realized they must be in the last extremities of the pass. Down at the level of the plains, there was no way he could even see the ground ahead of him. Trapped in the seething, jostling crowd, they rounded a final bend, and a lance of sunlight stabbed into the pass, forcing him to throw up a hand to shield his eyes. They had reached the entrance, he realized. He felt a shove from his left. Get over to the right, Eric told them, and the 4 Scandinavians formed a human wedge, forcing their way through the crowd until they were on the extreme right-hand side of the pass. There were growls and angry grunts from the Wargles they shoved, several of them being sent sprawling and then trampled before they could regain their feet. But the Scandinavians gave as good as they got in terms of threats and abuse. The sunlight hit them like a physical barrier as they emerged from the darkness of the pass, and for a moment Will and Evelyn hesitated. Eric shoved them on again, more anxious now, as he could hear a familiar voice calling commands for the Wargles to deploy. Morgoth was here, directing operations. Curse him, muttered Eric. I'd hoped he'd be out with the vanguard of the army. Keep moving, you 2. He shoved Will and Evelyn along a little faster. Will glanced back. Above the heads of the Wargles, he could see the tall, thin form of the Lord of Rain and Night, now clad entirely in black mail armor and surcoat, still seated on his white horse and calling instructions to the milling, chanting Wargles. Gradually they were moving into ordered formations, then taking their positions with the main army. As Will looked back, the pale face turned towards the group of hurrying Scandinavians, and Morgoth urged his horse towards them, unmindful of the fact that he was trampling through his own men to reach them. Captain Eric, he called. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried, thin and cutting through the chanting of the Wargles. Keep going, Eric ordered them in a low voice. Keep moving. Stop. Now the voice was raised, and the cold anger in it instantly silenced and sullied still the Wargles. As they froze in place around them, the Scandinavians reluctantly did the same. Eric turned to face Morgoth. The Lord of Rain and Night spurred his horses through the throng, Wargles falling back to make way for him, or being buffeted out of the way if they failed to do so. Slowly his eyes locked to those of Eric's. He dismounted, even on foot. He towered over the bulky Scandinavian leader. And where might you and your men be bound today, Captain? He asked in a silky tone. Eric gestured to the right. It's normal for me and my men to fight on the right wing, he said, as casually as he could manage, but I'll go wherever you need me if that doesn't suit. Will you? Replied Morgoth with withering sarcasm. Will you indeed? How terribly kind of you. He broke off, his gaze on the 2 smaller figures when the other Scandinavians had been trying unsuccessfully to shield from his gaze. Who are they? He demanded. Eric shrugged. Celts, he said easily. We took them prisoners in Celtica, and I'm planning to sell them to Obergel Ragnar as slaves. Celtica is mine, Captain. Slaves from Celtica are mine as well. They're not yours to take and sell to your barbarian of a king. The Scandinavians surrounding Will and Evan stared angrily at his words. Morgoth turned his cold eyes to them, then looked away at at the thousands of Wurgles who surrounded them, every one ready to obey any command of his without question. The message was clear. Eric tried to bluff his way through the situation. Our agreement was we fought for beauty, and that includes slaves, he insisted, but Morgoth cut him off. If you fought, he shouted furiously. Not if you stood by and let my bridge be destroyed. It was your man, Cherith, who was in command at the bridge, Eric flashed back at him. It was he who decided no guard was to be left on it. We were the ones who tried to save it while he was hiding behind rocks. Morgoth's gaze locked with Eric's once more, and now his voice dropped to a low, almost inaudible level. I am not spoken to in that fashion, Captain, Eric. He spat. You will apologize to me at once. And then he stopped in mid-sentence. He seemed to possess almost unnatural peripheral sense. Although he had been staring unblinkingly into Eric's eyes, he had apparently sensed something off to one side. Those black eyes now turned and trained on Will. One white bony finger was raised, pointing at the boy's throat. What is that? Eric looked and felt a sinking sensation in the pit of his stomach. There was a dull gleam of bronze visible in the gap of Will's open collar. Then Eric felt himself shoved to one side as Morgoth moved, snake fast, and snatched at the chain around Will's neck. Will staggered back, horrified at the implacable fury in those dead eyes, and the slight flare of colour above the cheekbones. Besides him, he heard Evelyn's intake of breath as Morgoth stared down at the small bronze oak leaf in his hand. A ranger, he raged. This is a ranger. This is their sight. He's a boy. Eric began, but now Morgoth's theory was turned upon him, and he swept his hand up in a backhand blow across the Scandinavian's cheek. He is not a boy. He is a ranger. The other three Scandinavians moved forward at the blow, weapons ready. Morgoth didn't even have to speak. He turned those glittering eyes on them, and 20 Wurgles moved as well, a warning growl in their throats, clubs and iron spears ready. Oh, look, you can see the sun. Eric signaled for his men to settle. The red mark of Morgoth's blows flared on his cheek. You knew, Morgoth accused him. You knew. Then realization dawned on him. This is the one. Arrows, you said. My Wurgles were hiding from arrows as the bridge burned. Ranger weapons. This is the swine who's destroyed my bridge. The voice rose to a shriek of fury as he spoke. Will's throat was dry and his heart pounded with terror. He knew of Morgoth's legendary hatred of rangers. All members of the courts did. Ironically, it was Holt himself who had triggered that hatred when he led the surprise attack on Morgoth's army at Hackham Heath 16 years previously. Eric stood before the raging Black Lord and said nothing. Will felt a small, warm hand creep into his. Evelyn. For a moment he marvelled at the girl's courage to bound herself to him like this in the face of Morgoth's implacable fury and hatred. Then another horse forced its way through the crowd. On its back was one of Morgoth's Wurgles' lieutenants, one of those who had learned basic human speech. My lord, he called in the peculiar and emotionless tones of all Wurgles. Enemy advancing. Morgoth swung to face him, and the Wurgle continued. Their skirmish line moving towards us, my lord. Battle is beginning. The Lord of Rain and Night came to a decision. He swung back into the saddle of his horse, his furious gaze now locked on Will's, not Eric. We will finish this later, he said. Then he turned to a Wurgle sergeant among those who had surrounded the Scandinavians. Hold these prisoners here until I return, on pain of your life. The Wurgles saluted, one first to his left breast, then growled a command to his men. They surrounded the Scandinavian party. The 4 sea-wolves now formed a small circle facing out, Will and Evelyn in the middle. They held their weapons ready. It was a standoff, and they were obviously prepared to sell their lives dearly. We'll settle this later, Eric, Morgoth said. Try to escape, and my men will cut you to pieces. And wheeling his horse, he galloped through the throng once again, scattering soldiers in his path, trampling those who were too slow to move. They heard the thin nasal voice calling commands to his forces as he disappeared. Okay, well, thank you for listening to me read chapter 30. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 31, please stay posted. Thank you. Bye bye.